Good evening, everyone. Good evening, St. James. I see that our folks are coming into the viewing space on Facebook. We are also on YouTube as well. Listen, if you don't mind, if you go to our Facebook page, if you're on Facebook, and just share this stream, all you have to do is click on the share button and you can share it directly to your page. And then what will happen is that those who are on your particular page will be able to click on the stream and come immediately into the room. And so if you don't mind doing that, I think that this is a dynamic session on tonight, and everyone needs to hear what this speaker is going to say. So I'm excited about this particular topic. This month on our life sessions, we are talking about the family. And one of the topics that we're starting out with is families and counseling. For those of you who are members of St. James, just a couple announcements for us. On tomorrow night, you know that we have Reignite Bible Study at 7 p.m. and we are going through the book of Job. This is an exciting study about the book of Job. And so if you haven't finished your readings, this is a great time to do that. Also on Thursday night at 7 p.m., we're having 2 live sessions this week. We will have Bishop Brian and Lady Pierce on, and they're going to talk about God, marriage, and the family. We're going to have an awesome time. As you know, that this is an informal interview style discussion where we give our presenters and those who are talking an opportunity to respond to some of our questions. Some of you may have questions. If you do, just drop them into the comment section, both on YouTube and on Facebook. So if you have any questions. So our guest tonight is Bishop C. Guy Robinson, an awesome man of God. He's a native of Baltimore, Maryland. He has a gift of music. He's a composer. He's a musician. He's an author. And also he holds a Doctor of Ministry degree with an emphasis in family therapy. He is the pastor of the Tabernacle of the Lord Church, the state bishop of Maryland for Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship. And he's the husband to Lady Sandra Robinson. And guess what? They have 4 children. So he knows about family, okay? He knows about marriage and family. So this is an expert, not only from life experience, but also he has the education to talk about counseling from a family perspective. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. So many of you are coming on. God bless you. God bless you. Sister Shirley Wilson, Sister Graves, Miss Searles, my mother is on. This is going to be exciting. All right. And so many others are on. So listen, I'm gonna bring on Bishop Robinson. This is informal again. This is interview styled. We're just going to have a good time and also at the same time get some pertinent information. So let's bring on Bishop Robinson. Hey, Bishop.
Great day, Pastor. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for accepting this particular virtual discussion. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. My pleasure. It's great to be here.
Yes. So listen, I rattled off so many things that you have accomplished. Did I miss anything?
just a guy from Baltimore, from the hood who loves Jesus.
I hear that. That's good stuff. So we're going to get started because I have a lot of questions that I think would be good for this particular topic. Again, we're talking about families and counseling, and anyone who has questions, who is viewing, please, even if you're on YouTube, you can go into the comments and we will be able to see your questions. So here's one question that I have for you, because when we start talking about counseling, some people cringe, some people make funny comments. Why is counseling so taboo in the African American community, as well as maybe even in the Black church? Like, why is it so taboo?
Wow, this is a great question, and there's a number of like anything, it's a couple of contributing factors. Socioeconomic, one is the social history. It is many studies have shown that as an African American community, since that's the context of this question, has been shown to have, because of the history of the unique ethnic group that is African American, meaning those who are brought here or were brought here by way of the North Atlantic slave trade,
Yes.
Created a unique ethnic group here in the American continent. And the pain tolerance is higher, which literally means it takes more pain for our community to say, hey, this hurts and I need to get some outside help.
Wow.
There's a kind of, we need to keep this inside, tough it up, bear it. And then that was accompanied by, quite frankly, lies of inferiority that kind of created a history in our culture of saying, no, we can't say something wrong with us because. And so there's that. And then there's the finance, because, you know, there is a financial cost, and when you have to make decisions, even though mental health services are prorated, and take those things into consideration. Many people don't know that. So there's if I have to make a decision, then I'll just kind of put this off to the last thing and deal with first things first. And then there's the social concepts that use mental health issues in derogatory terms. Man, you crazy.
Right.
You lost your mind. Dude, you bipolar.
Right.
Well, we're talking about serious conditions in really belittling context. All of that kind of creates a confluence of reasons why we're so hesitant to do that.
Wow. Wow. And even from a church dynamic. So, you know, we have that African American community, but I think even from a church dynamic, there's also, wouldn't you say, a struggle with that spiritual, pray about it. So what would you say even that there's even a struggle with that, even if you add religion into the aspect as well, right?
Absolutely. And some of it is, I would put it this way, from a faith perspective, soul care is an innate responsibility of the church. So at the very least, we do as the church, we are the general practitioners of the care of the soul, which translates the word soul actually in the New Testament is the Greek word psyche, which translates into the Latin Vulgate as psyche, from which we get the word psychology. So psychology really has borrowed its terms from the Bible because the church is, in this biblical account, the primary giver, just like we have a primary physician.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you have a primary physician, the primary physician will handle most cases. But if the primary physician sees something that is perhaps cardiovascular or involving intricacies of ENT series, he may send you to a specialist.
Wow.
So the church does have a very important role because that which is spiritual automatically encompasses ministering to the mind. But there are cases where more help is needed.
Wow. That's good. So listen, that really ties into my next question. So during the Full Gospel Cloud Conference, which, by the way, I enjoyed your session, so many of the classes I enjoyed, you made a profound statement, and I even tweeted about it. I said, you said we must create a culture of transparency where it is okay to say, I'm not okay. Wow, that was profound. So now this was in the context of the church when you were talking about it from an environment perspective. But do you think that that also applies to families or marriages as well? So can you expound on that?
Yes, certainly. And thank you for asking that. It is okay. The culture of transparency means where we're able to talk forthrightly about these issues without fear of being ridiculed, without fear of, without the anxiety of having to present an image as if we have it all together. Mm-hmm. There's some material now being shown that even in different forums, we have social media and all those kind of things, but we present our best efforts and our best selves in marketing, and that has its place. Don't get me wrong, but some people are reading that with the understanding that everybody has all of their I's dotted and T's crossed, except me. And so it kind of nurtures that feeling that I have to present my best self at all times.
Wow.
So the culture of transparency is honesty to say, in this area, I'm struggling a little bit. Today was not a good day, or I'm grieving. The homegoing, the funeral, or the job loss is over, but the emotions are still reverberating. And so we have to have a kind of culture that makes that okay. Even in church, African Americans, church is spiritual. It's also social. It's a social enclave. And sometimes we can overemphasize the social graces and the church faces at the expense of getting the help that is available in the sanctuary as well.
Wow. Wow. And you've said in this discussion about how the church is responsible for that soul care, and then even looking at, the culture of transparency. So here's a question. Do you recommend that the church or churches establish a counseling ministry or or have maybe a partnership with a third party counselor? Is that something that you think churches should look into, especially if they see a need?
Yes. In a short answer is yes. The continuation of that is I think that Christian ministry is by definition, all of us are to various degrees on a continuum, from 0 to 10 or whatever, but all ministers of the gospel have a responsibility to be at the least biblical counselors, because we affect that, and everyone has the influence. If you have someone's ear, you have the ability to counsel. Psalm 1 is very clear. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, which means there is such thing as people who have our ear but don't have the ear of God. And so there is a blessing to those at the same time that there's safety in a multitude of counsel from wise people. And so all of us as believers have a responsibility to be at least biblical counselors, so that the Lord won't say about us what he said about Job's friends. Right. The Bible at the end of Job, he says, your friends did not speak of me what was right, which means that they gave bad counsel at a critical time. So all of us have a responsibility to take our witness seriously. And if we take our witness seriously, we are counseling persons. Now, there are different levels of counseling. And so I do believe the church should have some ability to recognize thresholds of referral and to have a rudimentary awareness of when mental health concerns are presenting themselves in ways that may need a little more intensive care.
Wow. That's really good, because, even as a senior pastor, I've taken some psychology classes in college and that sort of thing. But, I think it's important that you bring up just having that rudimentary understanding of mental health issues. So this may even be an opportunity for someone to maybe take a class, especially while we're in the virtual world right now. It would be awesome, I guess, to take maybe a virtual class or something, just to kind of get the understanding of what are those signs that we may not know, naturally, of certain type of mental illnesses. Is that kind of what I hear you saying? Something like that?
Yes. To develop that's true of churches. And I say that in this context because it's also one of the recommendations for families who have someone in their family who is wrestling with mental illness. One of the first ways to respond to that as family is recommended by the others, National Alliance of Mental Illness and other national organizations, is to become educated about that area. for example, I'll keep it very simple. If you've ever had anyone in our family who has had perhaps dementia or a brain disease, we don't have to be neurologists. We don't have to be clinical psychologists.
That's very true.
Part of it involves learning, even if it's just to be the caregiver. To be the caregiver, we become sort of like de facto brain specialist, if you will.
Yes.
You had somebody in your family with a loved one with diabetes, and you learn how to cook for them. You don't have to be a clinical nutritionist, but you become one by practice. And so that's one of the main things, is to educate ourselves. And that's part of my passion to bring to the body of Christ, is just rudimentary awareness that in many cases, and I'll try to be quick, in many cases, we're already giving at least some rudimentary, very basic ministry to the mind, as in the things of the spirit. I shudder to think where African American community in particular would be without the presence of the African American church and its innately therapeutic content. One study showed that African Americans who are connected to a faith community have an average life expectancy increase of 13.7 years.
Wow.
And it's 13.7 years to the life expectancy of an African American just by being regularly connected and involved in a faith community. So there is an innately therapeutic element to the historically African American church. And so I'm not calling for replacement. We're just getting more resources to the institution that has been so helpful to us.
Awesome. Awesome. That was a great explanation. Thank you so much for that bit of information. Now, as we look at the family, would you say that marriage and the parent-children relationships are separate entities within a family?
They are what family, that's a great question. They are what family therapy would perhaps identify more as subgroups within the family. Okay. The family is the most important social influence on any one of us. We are all paradoxically social individuals. And that's a paradoxical term because in one sense, there's this need to develop my identity or individual persona. But the truth is there's no development of identity outside of social context and influence. The African proverb is, I am because we are. And so in a family, excuse me, you have the family unit, if you want to say that, the nuclear family, parents, and then children. But in that, and I'm speaking in a very traditional context, but in that context, I'm also mindful that 52% of the families in America are now blended or merged families, if you will. Okay. But you have the family unit, however you want to put that together, the couple, parents, husband, wife, and the children. But you also have subgroups. There's the subgroup that is the adult subgroup. There's the subgroup that is the children. There's the subgroup that is the males. There's the subgroup that is the females. So you got mom and daughter, father and son. So sometimes father and son might go out. And sometimes mother and daughter. And then they can, so there's subgroups. Having said that, there is credibility to say that the most important element of the family is the marital dyad. That husband and wife team, it really sets the stage, if you will, for the entire influence and impression that the house will make on the children. So it is so important that that marriage be strong, that it be healthy, and that it, for the sake of Christian marriage, reflect the standards of biblical standards. So that unit, and there are things that the husband and wife need to do to strengthen their marriage, not just for the good of each other, but for the good of the family.
Wow. Wow, that's good. That's an awesome answer. Okay. And so furthering, when we think of family and we think of a lot of the different types of families that are emerging as it relates to, sometimes they're single parents, right? Male and female. And so what would you say in this particular family style wherein the primary caregiver is not married, and maybe that other parent may be married or in a relationship or have their own group that also is their family? What would you say on that end and that structure is important in managing and being very mindful from a parental perspective, because obviously that's a little bit more difficult to manage. There are more touch points. It's not just two parents, right? It's other entities. So can you give us some insight into that as well?
Certainly, you kind of led towards it in a wonderful way. The communication is key because there still is a partnership there. It's a reality. Again, about 52% of families in our nation are blended or merged families. The nomenclature changes because people have different preferences, so
Right.
vacillate back and forth. But the blended family is a norm right now in our culture. And so the concept of having what some people call step parents or bonus parents, which perhaps gives a better perspective,
Right.
in those kinds. So it's important that our terminology, it's important that the communication happens, that it's still understood that there's partnership needed, and in our context, we still stand on the word of God. The psalmist is clear that, my mother and father forsake me, the Lord will take me up. And we have to understand that your life still has meaning and purpose. But family is important to God. Family is so important to God. I'll close this question with this, that Psalm 68 says something powerful. Psalm 68 says, God sets the solitary in families, which means that even God doesn't want us out there without a family. That's one of the roles of the historically African American church, is that we take people in as well. We create extended family. And again, so much of that goes back to the way we were to our ancestors, that you have to remember that a part of the African American experience is being sold and having family members sold to other states. So what do you do if you're a minor and you were brought to Georgia, but then you're sold to North Carolina and your parents are in another state? Well, someone else in North Carolina would take you under and say, you'll be my child. And we still have some vestiges of that, which is a good thing, of creating extended families and play cousins, if you will.
That's right.
That's a part and it's really biblical, because Psalm 68 says God sets the solitary, which means if you don't have a biological family, God will find one to fit you in. And that's one of the important roles of the church today as well.
Wow. That's so good. That's so good. I'm really enjoying this discussion. This is awesome. This is awesome. So here's another question, because we probably have different types of people who are looking at this, who will watch this also on the replay. We get a lot of views on the replay as well, who may be married, who may be thinking about getting married, engaged, and that sort of thing. And so this is also a very good discussion, I think, as a person is preparing to get married. What are some of the signs that a married couple should get counseling?
I'm loving these questions. To make it simple, the two ways that I want to say, there's two ways that couples, if I put it in two simple categories, and this is a gross simplification, but hopefully, but it can continue from here. When there is two ways, blow up or clam up. And that's typically the ways that couples handle conflict. Blow up, of course, is the big blow up. And and that can get really crazy, name calling, accusations. But when they're big blow ups, um, um, intermittent explosive disorders is the DSM term, the psychology term. But when there are these explosive moments that become threatening, and or the clamor is the silent treatment. In other words,
Hmm.
some people think that when you, sometimes in counseling, couples hear them say, "We never fight." Well, that's a trigger to me. Because the healthy relationship is not so much about never fighting as much as it is about what we call fighting fairly. Uh, because so the question is not, do you never fight? Usually that can allude to the fact that there's some repressed issues, not wanting to be confrontational. But and repressed means it keeps, just what it says, it keeps coming up, but I keep pressing it down, and it comes back up, and I press it down, and so that's repressed issues. So the question is not whether we ever have confrontation or if we ever fight, if you will. But the question is, do we fight fairly? Do we listen? Do we articulate? Do we frame our discussion well? Framing is a big thing in human communication. In counseling, the analogy is a picture is a picture, but you can increase or decrease the look of the picture by changing the frame. And the same thing is in the way we talk to each other. How you frame it can give value or cheapen the content of what you want to say. And these things are so important in the marital dialogue and in relationships in general.
Wow, you just said something awesome. How we frame it can add value or cheapen what we're trying to. Wow, that's wow, that's really good. Because when I think about communication, oftentimes, you know, depending on who is the more emotional person or who is, because it's not always the woman, I find in relationships, whoever the most emotional person is, but oftentimes that framing and actually how something is presented is so key. um, you know, I remember a preacher one time saying, you know, if you cook a steak dinner and you put all of the fixings together and the gravy and everything, and then instead of putting it on a plate, you take the garbage lid and turn it over and put the meal on the garbage lid. It's a good meal, but it just wasn't presented in a way that someone is gonna want to eat it or indulge in it or enjoy it. And so that's a very, very, very good point about that framing. So I hope there's some married couples that's listening to this, so that you can work on your framing.
Yes, and that's key, Pastor Richardson. It involves knowing that's a part of knowing our spouse or significant. It's a part of knowing them. That includes knowing history, and without nerding out on it too much, but we all have, you know, there's a school of thought that's called imago therapy, and we kind of already have an image of what a relationship looks like before we get into one. And a lot of that has to do with, again, how we were brought up. And so you have to know what issues may trigger things that are problematic. You have to know what things my dad used to blow up like that, or my mom used to do whatever. And so if you know that that's an issue, then we have to work on learning each other's love language is Dr. Gary Chapman's term, which means it might not be, and that's what framing is. It means this might not be the way I normally talk, but because we're in relationship, I need to learn, just as if you spoke French, I would need to say things in French a different way because I'm trying to reach you. And so it is in couple relationships that I have to learn how to say it the way it reaches you, so that there's not just there's not just intention. In communication, there's intention and then there's interpretation. And sometimes we can have good intentions, but we can't control the person's interpretation. And so we have to be aware of how we're being understood, even as we're communicating. And so all those things are just kind of key in the relationship dynamics.
Yes, yes. And even from, I guess, counseling, even from a uh, serious relationship, maybe a couple is looking to get married and they haven't necessarily gotten engaged or anything. Do you think that that's too early to start counseling?
No, 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 no. I believe the sooner the better, uh, um, um, because you want to be aware of these issues and strategies. You want to be as well prepared as possible, and so I think that it's important to do that. And I'm glad you asked that, because the image again that we see in the culture is just sort of like focused on planning the wedding. But it's just as important, more important, that we plan for the marriage.
Yes.
Because after the event is over, then we have to begin to look at building a relationship and a life as one. And so these issues have to be confronted in a good way,
Yes.
so that we can make the relationship as healthy as possible.
Yes. One of the reasons why I say that is because, like, for example, I'm a single, I'm a single female, but I've been in relationships. I've been in relationships in the past that I thought was going to go to marriage. And what I noticed is that even from a childhood trauma perspective, there were certain blocks that communication would blow up a certain way. And so sometimes people don't think, I didn't think at that time, why don't we go to counseling? Because we're not married. Though I'm in a serious relationship, I didn't think at that time, why don't we go to counseling? Because I think it probably would have been hindsight good to know how to talk to him when he had those moments, right? Because trauma just doesn't go away. I think sometimes people think that, but I don't think it just goes away. What's your perspective on that from a counseling therapy perspective?
Yes, the whole concept of post-traumatic stress is exactly that, is that the emotional reactions and feelings reverberate after the actual event. So the event is over, but the processing and the reliving of it, and also the anxieties from it continue. And so that's very key. And what you are, and a part of what counseling does is help to recognize those things. It doesn't cancel. It doesn't mean this is off, but it means that it equips the significant other as spouses with as much information as we can to be a helpmate to each other. And so the better we understand those issues, the better we can help address them and combat them together. And so it's important to know that. And I would add, here's my disclaimer as a servant of the church, that it needs to be biblical counsel. That is knowledgeable of the scriptures and knowledgeable of some of these, there's some place for understanding attachment theory without nerding out too much, but we have attachment styles, and that's how it is in the relationship. If we had some trauma that triggered for us insecure attachments, that we may be prone to call more. If another person has a more distant attachment in your partner, like, why are you calling me all the time? So you need to talk through all of that, because it may seem too clingy, but it's not clingy. It's an attachment style. And so you need to talk through those things without the derogatory verbiage, so that we can really be a help to each other. And so there's a place for that, but there's also a place to understand that the biblical definition of marriage is there's a widening of the gap between the way the common culture is now looking at couples and relationships. In fact, my area of study, emphasis was marriage and family therapy, but the nomenclature is different. There's couples therapy, which means that not everybody who's together is married. And so there's the secular concept, but there's also a dramatic difference in the biblical concept of what marriage looks like. So I would say biblical counseling for those who are believers in the body of Christ.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for that. So just to kind of bring in some today's, I guess, events and looking at 2020 and this pandemic and everything that is happening from your insight and experience and research even, how has the pandemic impacted families?
Wow. Powerfully. I'll use this analogy. I'll start with I'll start with what Dr. Anthony Fauci said some time ago. This pandemic has been going on a while, so can't remember the, but it's a couple of months ago. But he said that the pandemic was revealing some pre-existing conditions. They were already there. I want to use that as the springboard to say so it is in some of the data with research on the impact of this pandemic on families that are now quarantined, revealing pre-existing conditions. I would caveat that to say not every pre-existing condition is bad. Some are bad, but whatever's already there is being revealed or exposed. By that I mean there's some persons that that are reporting that the time together has been beneficial, especially if it is on the good side, perhaps. And these are don't lock me into these in gender roles, but perhaps if it's been a very busy couple, now the husband is home and the to-do list can finally get done. The wife may be like, "I'm so glad to have you home." There are some reports like that, and wife is home and taking care of business and some things or whatever. The husband's like, "I'm so glad we're here." So there are some cases in which the strengths of the marriage are being highlighted. There's also some data to show. And I start with that because sometimes the psychological disciplines come from a negative perspective, that everything is wrong. Right. So starting from the positive psychology side, I want to say there's some good reports. Yes. On the flip side, there is some documentation of increased reports of strife and even abuse, particularly in families where there were already pre-existing conditions. Merged or blended families where there was existing strife already between the parent by marriage and the parent biologically. And so there were already issues that were existing there. There were already existing issues with persons where one family member had substance abuse issues. Now you're quarantined and in the same house. And so these issues are right in your face, if you will. Yes. So there are some reports of elevated confrontation. So both are true. But the point is, it is spending more time in the house is revealing conditions that were already set.
Wow. Now, listen, also from your experience, from, counseling and just research, who is the most, or which sex is the most resistant to counseling? I know automatically people think it's men, but I don't know if that's true. I just want to ask the expert on this.
We all have our resistances.
That's true.
Things that go internal. I'll put it this way. I agree with psychiatrist M. Scott Peck, who said that it is sometimes difficult because men, we are trained, we are engendered, we are socialized to guard our internal self. The whole thing of a hard exterior has been so engendered with being masculine. Even Freud's use, who coined this term defense mechanisms, is a military term. He was fond of military analogies. So this whole concept of being armored, of having my exterior hardened, of being hard. We're engendered as men that if someone shows an emotional moment to say you're being soft. And so, but the truth is that men have emotions and we have feelings as well. So sometimes you see even the nomenclature in the mental health disciplines changing. If you go, not to nerd out on the history, but too much, but it's making the case to say that, I think you know what I'm saying, it's the men, it's us. Yes. So, Freud's term originally for these anxious moments was hysteria. Hysteria is an interesting word, and it was pretty much equated with effeminate kinds of things. The particular surgery that a woman has is a hysterectomy. So I hope you hear the etymological or word study relation between those two words. So it was originally referred to these anxious moments as hysteria. But then it was found that it wasn't just women who were having these symptoms. Persons coming back from World War I were beginning to show some of these same issues and concerns with mental health. So it's same stuff, but you had to call it shell shock. And so, because it sounds more amenable to us as brothers, if you will. Right. And, so now shell shock has evolved into post-traumatic stress disorder. Gotcha. My point is the exact same presenting conditions virtually, but the nomenclature has changed for engendering purposes, which kind of leads towards the point that as men, we're kind of trained not to show that part of us. Yes. But us not showing it does not mean that it's not real. Men have emotions too.
Right. And I'm always personally in a moment or in a inquiring, if you will, to really want to understand, right? So I'm also a bivocational pastor. So my career is construction management. I'm a project management, construction management. So I have 6 brothers. My entire college career mostly was with gentlemen because I was in construction and architectural engineering and that sort of thing. And so that's certainly, who I'm around the most, right? And so I'm always in, inquiring, wanting to understand, because that is very true. I see that where even at work, there are moments and times where we're in a meeting or doing something and I can tell there's some emotion there, but it seems like there's just a innate to protect even that emotion. Even sometimes when it's anger, it's a walk off in lieu of spewing out, right? So it's just an understanding, I think, on the differences and the mindset even.
Yes, absolutely, Pastor. And here's my disclaimer for those. I'm not being sexist. I'm just talking about engendering. And there are exceptions. So we're painting with a broad brush here. Absolutely. Are there sensitive brothers? Are there men who have said, listen, I need to talk to you? Are there men who cried in a moment in the office? Absolutely. Are there, if you will, quote unquote, hardened, or women who have been hardened by the cares of life? Absolutely. Yes. So there are exceptions. We're just speaking in statistical norms.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for that disclaimer. That's good. Thank you so much for that disclaimer. That's good. Because we don't know who's going to see this and what feedback. So that's good. Thank you so much for that disclaimer. So as we're looking, there might be someone who's listening who has identified, I really need to get some counseling, or we need to seek some counseling. Can you guide us maybe through that process on how a person can find a trustworthy or a counselor that they feel comfortable with?
Very good question. I want to kind of draw a little bit of an analogy between finding a counselor or going to a counselor and finding a pastor into a church. Again, because you're entrusting your spiritual care and you're entrusting same idea, some of your intimate moments. And so by that, I mean, you may not have not every counselor is for every person.
Mhm.
Just like not every pastor in church is for every person. And so don't give up on it if it didn't work the first time. A major thing of counselor, the first 1, 2, 3 sessions is usually all about seeing if we even have chemistry. Can we work together? Are you comfortable? And so don't go to one and say, that didn't work out. Just like I pray, we wouldn't go to one church and say, I went to church when back there a few years ago, I went to one. Well, try another. It just means that that one wasn't there. But you'll know when you find that place, there'll be a chemistry. And I suggest now a lot of the work that I've done on my end is which is much of my work and research and writing has been about churches doing some research actually to have some awareness of some places that have cultural competence. Truth is, the questions that you need to make it clear that you're a person of faith. There's nothing wrong with that. Saying that you know that your faith plays a big deal, and so that person has cultural competence not to infringe upon your faith system if that is not what you want to do. And so all of that is what you need to be mindful of. And then do they have cultural competence to your socioeconomic context? So cultural competence is a big deal, and cultural awareness. And so all those things play into it. You might not find chemistry the first time. The studies actually show, and this is not a suggestion, but this is just information, they parallel so many ways. Most persons go to counselors of their same ethnicity. And so maybe that plays a part in the gender, in the chemistry, rather, in the connection. My point is that you have to find the right person, just like you have to find the right pastor. And you'll know that when you find that. And don't give up on it if you don't get it at that connection at the first try.
Yes, that's good. And something you said in this explanation, you mentioned, you said work together. So that to me communicates that this is not someone sitting telling you what to do. This is like a partnership. That's what counseling is. It's a give and take, right?
Yes, it is. It is professional intimacy is the term they use in the discipline. Professional intimacy, and that's what makes it profoundly different from the pastor. You know, there's a saying around that's kind of circulating that says it's okay to have Jesus and a therapist, and I certainly wouldn't knock that, but I would add to it, it's okay to have Jesus, a pastor, and a therapist. Okay. Because what you have done is you have personified one and given person form that the therapist is an actual person. Yes. And so is Jesus, but you need another human being in the pastor to help you rightly divide the word of truth. And so you've given the therapist human form, but you also need to give the role of the Spirit working through a man or woman from the God who said, I will give you pastors after mine own heart. Good. Because the roles are profoundly different. And so you kind of hit a moment with me, Pastor. So here we go. So roles are different. Your therapist is trained not to, or to really limit self-disclosure. You won't know a lot about your therapist because it is what we call client-based therapy, which means it's all about listening to you. And so you won't need to know, you won't hear your therapist talk about, on most cases, their husband, their wife, their children, their experience. There's no testimony, in other words, if you will, to put it in church terms. So it's easy to put that on a pedestal because you don't have, you don't see the humanization. But you disclose all of your life, and that has its place so that it can be centered around you. Carl Rogers called that client-based therapy. So it's really, the story is one way. So it's professional intimacy because it's one-sided. That's done intentionally. The difference is Your pastor is not just the preacher, but is also a living epistle. So you see us in our struggles, you see us in our strengths, you see us age, you see us start as young and spry, you see our hair turn gray, you see our hair fall out, you see us raise our children, you see us go through marital and or relationship realities, you see us wrestle with illness and still mount the pulpit or take a break or need a sabbatical. You see our humanity. So we're not supermen and superwomen. You see our kryptonite as well. And that's the difference of in your pastor, we don't just preach the gospel, but we testify of it, that we preach in season and out of season. So it's easier to see our faults. And we are taught not to even hide them. Paul said, I bear on my body the marks of ministry. And we serve a Savior who hung on a cross and let us see him be wounded. And so there's a different kind of transparency to the testimony. So we do a different kind of therapy, but they both are necessary and important. They can't substitute for the other.
Wow, this is so good. I can just continue on and on. Let me tell you, this is this is so good. Thank you so much. We do have a question in the comments, and I'm going to show it, and I'm going to read it as well. What is a good way to suggest group or individual counseling within the family?
You do it. That is a sense. That's a good question, because we started out, Pastor Richardson, with this conversation of how sensitive the whole subject is.
Yes.
So the best way to do it is really to communicate it, that I'm thinking that this might need we might need to contact the therapist. We might need to, whatever that level it is, whether it's, I think we might need to go to pastor about this, or I think we might need to go to therapy about this. Whenever you try to bring in someone else, you may get resistance. So the framing becomes important. That's when it's important to say, we got to see somebody because you done lost your mind. I think you crazy. Then, that framing might not sell the picture. You know what I mean?
Right.
When we have to be mindful to present it in a particular way. But there are certain things that automatically can bring the subject of counseling into the issue. I talk about them in my research and call it the five: psychosis, suicide, depression, substance abuse, brain disease, like Alzheimer's, dementia. If you begin to suspect any of those things, then it is automatically at least worth considering that we may need to do or look into some kind of therapeutic intervention. Even for churches, that's the threshold of consideration for referral with those five. And so, again, they're the things you need to bring it up. It's a question of framing. And a good way to suggest it depends on the personality with which you're dealing. Because personalities are so disparate, there's no one cookie cutter way to say we need to consider it. You may need to take the personality into consideration. If it's a hothead, if it's a clam up kind of person, if it's a sensitive person, you're saying the same thing. Either way it ends up, we need to consider therapy. But the way you frame it is contingent upon the personality you're dealing with.
Awesome. So I have two more questions. The next question is, as again, going back to families, pandemic, just different things. And I think it's very important for parents, guardians, to be able to pinpoint certain things in their children. Are there any specific signs of depression or suicide that can be noticed early that, a parent may want to know before they get that horrible call or, anything like that? Is there anything like that you can share with us? Because so many young children and teenagers and even college students are having very hard time right now. And I think it would be beneficial if parents or guardians would know some of those signs.
Great question. Some great research out of Johns Hopkins Hospital and others that allude to the idea that the onset, really we're talking about the onset of these conditions, it's somewhere in the age when we first began to see it, is somewhere in the age of mid-teens through early 20s. And the earlier that it is recognized, the better the opportunity to treat it most effectively. Some of those things include what you mentioned. There are specific things for depression, and depression. We want to distinguish episodes from diagnosis. Everyone perhaps, depression is sometimes called in the mental health professions, sometimes loosely referred to in lay talk as the common cold of mental illness.
Gotcha.
Because we all have moments when we feel a little down. And so we want to distinguish an episode from a diagnosis, which diagnosis comes from a professional. But that professional, there are certain triggers that we can look for. Change in appetite, change in sleep patterns, weight loss or weight gain, pervasive feeling of sadness. Some persons have described moments with things like depression as a cloud or weight. When you get a group of those symptoms occurring at the same time for 2 weeks or more, it gets into considering that you may want to get help to see if it is a diagnosable condition with which you're dealing. And so that comes from being attentive. And some of that, is just plain old parental instinct. I don't want to discount that because we are spiritual beings. And as a servant of the Lord, I want to say sometimes you just know in your spirit that something's not right. And it's okay to err on the side of caution and say we at least need to get this checked out.
Yeah, good. And last question, are there any resources or books out there that can assist pastors on this journey to that partnership I think you mentioned earlier, and resources maybe even for married couples or anyone? Are there any resources out there that we can log and you can educate us about, books or articles or anything of that manner?
Certainly. I'm a bit of a book nerd here, so that's my confession. So I love to talk this talk. There are a couple. I'll start with the most obvious. That's my passion. My book is entitled Critical Collaboration. I don't know if you can see that, but it's literally all about pastors and mental health professionals as partners in care. And that's really trying to establish a paradigm for partnership for pastors, and not just pastors, but people who serve in pastoral capacities. If you are a ministry leader, you're an auxiliary leader, you're a worship leader, the team that you lead, you're the lead of the ushers ministry or the choir, and people present to you, you're the direct report. It's important that we notice some of the symptomology to perhaps be able to report that to pastor, and then pastor can disseminate that information or conduct a referral or take it from there. But that's what my passion is. It's available on Amazon. You can put in the name in the book. It's in Kindle format, so if you're a techie and prefer an electronic download, it is in that electronic format as well. And that's one. So thank you, because that's part of my passion. It's my ministry to help the church reclaim its biblical role as the principal provider of soul care. And so, and then secondly, another book that's good is by an author named Steve Bloem, Bloem. Steve Bloem. It is called A Pastor's Guide to Mental Illness. That's a great reference for any persons working in pastoral ministry leaders and workers. married couples, maybe The 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work. This is a good book as well. 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work is by John Gottman, who has done some great work in marriage and family therapy. And so that's just a couple off the top of my head, but
Okay.
I would recommend any of those.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I don't think that this is going to be the last time, hopefully, that we have a conversation like this from, since I've started pastoring at St. James Baptist Church. I'm also re-imaging our elders and ministers training. And that training is called Evident. And in that, we're going to start reading some books and talking about those books. And naturally, this is one of the books that's on our schedule. They don't even know it yet. So if they're finding out right now, they got books on their schedule that we're going to just talk through, because I just believe that when we have ministers and elders training, it's not also just to serve our church where they're serving now, but we don't know. Some of our ministers or elders may be pastors themselves. And so I want to be able to train accordingly for those skill set that they may need for future ministry. So I'm hoping that maybe after we read your book and sometime in the future, hopefully we can actually get you here in 2021. We'll see what happens, where we can actually just have, some type of training on that, because I think that it's so important in the church. And I love how you don't eliminate that pastoral connection, and how we have to have that component, that spiritual component. So thank you so much for your time, for your effort. And I'm definitely, you'll see an order from us real soon on some of those books. And so we're going to definitely support what you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Pastor Richardson. Bless you. Thank you, St. James, for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So listen, everyone, those book recommendations, we will make sure we put them in the comments. So if you do want to purchase those books, you'll have that link. You'll be able to go as well to Amazon and purchase Bishop Robinson's book as well. Thank you so much for your questions. I'm just going to check one more time. Awesome. We don't have any more questions. So thank you so much for your questions, your interaction. And if you do have any other questions or any concerns, you can reach out to us at the church, info@stjamesbc.org. And you can set up an appointment with me as well if we need to talk about anything as well. Well, St. James, God bless you. Thank you so much for tuning in. And those who have joined who are not a part of St. James, thank you so much for visiting. And join us tomorrow for Bible study, Reignite. We're talking through the book of Job. God bless you. God keep you. This is certainly my prayer.